Frost Decay is banging in the War Within, and that's because it was reworked into a much better spec, and some people don't agree with this whatsoever, but I will do my best to convince you otherwise, because it's looking like Frost Decay might climb back into the meta ranks in the War Within in the first season, and if you've wanted to play Frost Decay for a while, this might be your time. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, is because the current playstyle is kind of going away. So I don't know when the last time was when you've played Frost Decay, but if you've played it anytime recently, the playstyle is fairly straightforward. You either play Breath of Sindragosa or you play Obliteration, probably with a two-handed weapon, considering that in Dragonflight in the last 2 seasons, you have had access to a legendary weapon that was a two-handed weapon that would obviously get you to play with that particular weapon. Now, Breath of Sindragosa has always really performed really well with 2 weapons, and that has to do with a lot of things that we'll get to it in a couple of seconds when we address the reworked version of Frost Decay. And that's pretty much it, as opposed to how it used to play back in BFA, where it was a very cookie-cutter Breath of Sindragosa build, and even Shadowlands. Frost Decay has come a long way to incorporate 2 different playstyles, whether it is the two-hander Obliteration with big Obliteration crit, or the dual-wield uptime of Breath of Sindragosa. And still, with these 2 builds, it was not only a little bit lackluster in terms of performance, let's be honest, it hasn't really pushed high, and with the exception of maybe 1 season in Shadowlands when we had that encrypted affix, where you just got a lot of affix and you could maintain a big uptime on breath, but even that was particularly terrible, and I'm actually going to talk about that right now and why it is actually really hard for Frost Decay to be meta, particularly with Breath of Sindragosa. Because right now the gameplay in terms of content design, in terms of the dungeons, particularly in the War Within, but it's probably true for Dragonflight and past expansions as well, does not really promote playstyles that reward uptime type skills like Breath of Sindragosa, which is an uptime type playstyle. What do I mean by that? Well, uptime is basically the longer you can do this one thing, the better your damage is. And in the case of Breath of Sindragosa, the longer you can maintain that breath, ideally for around a minute, that's usually the benchmark for a good Frost Decay, then you get value out of it, considering that it's a 2-minute cooldown, and outside of Breath of Sindragosa, Frost Decay really does not have anything else that they do, and that's a little bit of a shame because the spec is really fun. Now, with that type of playstyle not being very rewarded, it's very hard to find Breath of Sindragosa and get a place for it in the gameplay, whether it is in Mythic Plus and Raids, although it's probably a little bit easier on Raids since, you know, normally you have more uptime on this one big boss than on back-to-back packs in a dungeon per se. And that's always going to be an issue until Breath of Sindragosa will be changed, drastically changed, and not just buffed in terms of its damage. I don't know where they're going to take this because they haven't actually touched this at all with the rework of Frost Decay, so you're likely probably not going to do it either. You're going to be playing some other stuff. And we can segue into the new playstyles of Frost Decay with the new capstones that it has, particularly revolving around auto attacks. One of the biggest source of your damage right now is Icy Death Torrent, which is a talent that I believe what it says is when you critically strike with an auto attack, you launch a sleet of ice dealing damage to one target or AoE targets and so on and so forth. There are other talents that Frost Decay has received that promote dual wield even more. Talents like the Long Winter, which makes it so that when Pillar of Frost is active and you critically strike with your auto attacks, you extend its duration. Together with Icy Death Torrent, obviously that works really well. Not to mention that crit is a pretty much integral part of Frost Death Knight, considering it's how you proc those killing machines. And to further augment you kind of really wanting to play a dual wield style playstyle, we have a new capstone which probably wasn't necessarily designed to favor dual wield, but it indirectly does. Particularly Shattered Blade has kind of changed a little bit your priority in your rotation, where it actually makes Frost Strike really good, because what you do is when you Frost Strike a target with 5 stacks of Razor Eyes, you consume those Razor Eyes and you do more damage, and the damage can also be split in AoE. And that happens with the actual capstone, which is called Shattered Frost. Now, this of course promotes you to play dual wield. But why? Because when you read them, you wouldn't really figure that out. Well, first of all, you want Razor Eyes as a source of damage and as most likely a rune weapon. You of course get Razor Eyes from some other talents like Avalanche, for instance, but that is essentially not enough considering how many stacks of Razor Eyes you end up consuming. So you would want one of the weapons to be imbued or rune forged with Razor Eyes, and of course your other weapon always fall on Crusader because the buff in strength is just so good. No ever enchant for weapons will ever trump these two enchants. And since you're going to be coupling these with the other dual wield auto attack type talents, obviously any talent that rewards auto attacks, particularly the Icy Death Torrent that I mentioned before, rewards more auto attacks, which means, you know, 2 weapons, you attack with double the weapons, and 100 weapons are usually faster than 200 weapons anyway. So it's very likely that the 200 weapon for Frost Decay is dead, at least for the War Within, unless some big changes happen to the playstyle or to the actual capstone, since they don't really seem to want to function with two-hander. You can still play two-hander, by the way. You'll probably do significantly less damage, and the spec will probably feel significantly worse in terms of pacing and flow. And now we can get into the hero talents, where the gameplay obviously changes, and this is to address people that might still believe that Frost Decay is a fairly, I don't want to say brain dead, because I feel like that people just throw that term around a lot, but it's a simple spec. It's not a complex spec. Listen, it's not Enhancement Shaman or Outlaw Rogue, but it's come a long way from, you know, just pressing Killing Machine, just pressing Obliterate when Killing Machine procs, and, you know, Howling Blast when Rhyme procs, of course. So now you have, first of all, Deathbringer, which is probably something that most people revolve around, considering that this is not the hero talent that, you know, pulled a lot of people to Death Knight, but we'll get to Rider as well. But Deathbringer just is the simple way of making a very simple spec way more fun without making it complex. Deathbringer gives you a new ability called Reaper's Mark, and what that does is launches a wave of damage in front of you and just damages everybody, applies some debuffs. I'm not going to go into what the hero talent does. You will have it and you'll see it once you get it, once the expansion launches. But what that does, it just does a lot of damage, puts a lot of stacks, and activates the capstone, which is Exterminate. And with Exterminate, your obliteration, or obliterate rather, the ability does a big sweeping scythe that does a lot of damage. What this means is that you, of course, have a new button that you want to press, and a button that does pretty much how Frost Decay AoE kind of works, which is a cone in front of you. It's not really a cone, but a line of damage in front of you. So this, of course, makes you always want to figure out your positioning. This is something that not a lot of Frost Decays do, or it's not very intuitive for a lot of Frost Decays, particularly the ones that haven't played with the Glacial Advanced talent or played essentially in Legion, where most of your AoE damage just comes from lining up all of your mobs in front of you and constantly launching these damages, these waves of frost damage. And having an extra button actually matters, considering that you can augment it in different ways, where you can have it at a shorter cooldown or to hit harder or things like that. Just adds a different dynamic to it, and you rotate this as a mini cooldown. Of course, you can probably, maybe ideally want to use it during your pillar, which changes your pillar rotation a little bit. And seeing as how you couple this with your actual need of pressing Frost Strike a lot more, because Frost Strike does a lot of damage, you end up also prioritizing consuming Runic Power a little bit more, which was not something that you would be doing before, where you would cap Runic Power and not really care about it. The only time you would ever care about Runic Power is if you have enough to consume it to proc some rune generation, or regeneration rather, so you can use more Obliterates. But with this comes like a more intricate rotation and priority system for your abilities that keeps you engaged in your AoE with some damage windows. Then we can go back to Rider of the Apocalypse, what most people have been talking about and probably what pulls more people in. This does not add that many intricate playstyles to Frost like Deathbringer does. It doesn't elevate a little bit more because it's pretty much passive. What this does, however, is give you Frostworm's Fury value, because Frostworm Fury will summon your Horsemen of the Apocalypse. You, of course, throughout your combat will still summon them occasionally, doing different things, but tying this to Frostworm's Fury, and of course you're probably going to be running Absolute Zero as the talent for a shorter cooldown, which is not something that Deathbringer will do, changes how you think a little bit about Frost, where with Deathbringer, the meat of your damage is Pillar and Reaper's Mark. Here you have Pillar and Frostworm's Fury. Sure, you launch Frostworm's Fury with Deathbringer as well, but now you actually think about how to and when to, because once these horsemen are out, a lot of damage is coming in, and the rotation overall just feels very smooth with all of the procs and things that the horsemen do for you. And although this is not necessarily related to damage, the fact that you have Death's Charge actually hopping on a mount and moving around makes Rider of the Apocalypse feel so good for both Unholy and Frost, but particularly for Frost because you are no longer an immobile spec. I cannot stress enough how good this extra movement speed is. For 10 seconds, you are essentially on a mount every, what, 40 seconds or however long the cooldown for Death's advances, and you have 2 charges because you're always going to be running Death's Echo, by the way, and you're never really in need of constant 100% uptime of this. So you will, you know, of course, have time for it to regenerate and get your cooldown back up, so when you have to move, you can move around. What this could potentially have the potentially to do is to maybe revive Breath of Sindragosa as a playstyle, but it would still have to have the actual ability be addressed and modernized a little bit, where it's not a 2-minute cooldown, where if you fuck it up and you drop it in like 10-12 seconds, then you have nothing to do for the remaining 1.5 minutes. Because having access to Death's Advance and being able to be super mobile, and not only be super mobile, super fast, also immune to knockbacks, gives you a lot of staying power when it comes to uptime style mechanics that Breath of Sindragosa is essentially giving you. So there is potential for the spec to be here, but overall, in terms of how fun Frost Decay is, it is leagues above in terms of playstyle, even if it might not seem like it, above Dragonflight and definitely Shadowlands and definitely BFA, depending on when the last time was when you've played Frost Death Knight. And I haven't had as much fun trying to optimize my rotation, particularly with Frost Strike, Razor Eyes consuming, where you might be able to tap targets in AoE to consume Razor Eyes on each one, build them accordingly. That is really fun. That's something that Unholy kind of does, and Enhancement Shaman kind of does. Not very many specs engage with AoE in that sense, and that is essentially new for Frost Death Knights to do, at least new in the latest 3 or 4 expansions, and that is actually really fun, coupled with the damage procs and the increase in mobility and everything that the War Within brings. Frost Decay is only on an upward trend, and the fact that it also does a buttload of damage is actually amazing, and we super recommend you actually play it. And we get that some of the major reasons why you're playing Frost Decay or DK in general are the hero talents, because they're bangers. So we also recommend you check our hero talents tier list video, where we've tested and played and ranked all of the hero talents based on their fun aspect and impact in the gameplay and how cool they actually are in the game. You can check it out and prepare your ults accordingly.